This is Dr. Kevin Peter Hickerson, and you're listening to the Matt Balaker podcast.
Hello, fine people out there. Today's guest is brought to you by my cousin John. He asked for him by name. So John, I assume you're listening. This one's for you. Today's guest is a physicist, inventor, and comedian. Please welcome Dr. Kevin Peter Hickerson to the show. How you doing, Kevin?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Again, thanks for having me again.
I like to have you, during and after pandemics. That's kind of the schedule.
Yeah.
We're between serious pandemics.
Right.
I do want to give a shout out, like I said, to my cousin John, who brought you up during a recent family reunion. And he wanted to hear your take, and as do I, on nuclear energy. But before we get into that, I want to learn a little bit more about like where you grew up and how you got so into science. So where'd you grow up, Kevin?
So I was born in New Jersey, but at a very young age moved to California, to Southern California. And actually, shortly after that, not related to it, but shortly after, I became very interested in physics. It was about the age of 5. I knew I wanted to be a physicist, which is pretty young, but that's
yeah. I mean, most 6-year-olds are into physics, but 5, that seems pretty. So while I was eating paste, you were going over Newton's laws. Like, how did you know that, like, as a 5-year-old, like, I have a penchant for physics?
Well, I was pretty smart for a 5-year-old, so that helped. I'm not sure that helped me completely in life, but it helped at the time. But the main thing was I really liked to think about things a lot, and in particular, the thing that made me really interested in physics were there were 2 big things that really bothered me. One was this concept that the universe was infinite. I think my dad told me that. He said somebody.
Sorry, time out. As a 5-year-old, this bothered you, or as an adult?
Yes, as a 5-year-old. No, now I'm completely comfortable with it. It's actually a very pleasant idea nowadays. But as a 5-year-old, it was really upsetting because I sort of visualized. People have talked about, like, what if there's a whole universe inside of an atom, or what if we're inside of a whole universe? I just sort of visualized that as a kid, and I just kept zooming out and just thinking there could be giants, like seeing us as just a speck, and that they could be just a speck, and that, like, it literally terrified me. I mean, it scared me. Like, I'm pretty sure I started crying. I think it caused me to cry. And I found this idea really upsetting. But that wasn't exactly, that got me interested in the general idea of physics, but that wasn't what really got me to study physics later, or, later in my childhood and then later professionally. The other thing my dad told me was, he said, "Oh, you can't go faster than the speed of light." And I was like, to me, that made no sense. Ironically, it's the opposite of the infinite, right? It's like saying there's a barrier, so it should make you feel better, but but it didn't make me feel better, because that one, I was like, that can't be right. I got to prove that wrong. And my mom told me, well, if you want to prove that wrong, you have to be a physicist. And so then I was like, what is this physicist thing? So that's I had started to study it.
So what did your parents do?
My dad was a business consultant, and my mom was a school teacher.
Okay, so professional.
Neither of them were scientists.
Yeah, not necessarily, but they're kind of fueling your curiosity.
Yeah. But my mother was my dad did study a lot of science when he was younger. He could have been a scientist, I think. He just chose not to. My grandfather was an engineer, and he worked on the Apollo program and worked on the space shuttle. But he actually died right around the same time, when I was 5. So okay. Unfortunately, I didn't get to talk to him a lot about it. But I feel like there's a little bit of him in me somehow, because when I read his stuff that is left behind by him, I'm like, whoa, I think we would have gotten along really well.
I'm sure you would have. And
Yeah.
I guess listeners want to know, like, do you think people walked on the moon, or is that an elaborate hoax, in your opinion?
Well, yeah, I have some disagreements with some friends about that. I personally do, but I have a very personal reason. I mean, I just don't believe my grandfather was lying. It's really that simple. I believe he worked on. I don't think it's not just that I don't think he was lying. I don't think he was lied to. He was friends with the Apollo 1 astronauts, for example. He helped the part he was a technical writer, so he helped with the instruction manuals for the Apollo modules and stuff like that. So
Very
he
cool.
actually worked with the astronauts. They actually participated a lot. They were not just dumb monkeys being launched into space. They were really smart, really bright, ast- uh, like pilots and engineers, and they helped design a lot of the stuff that they had to interact with. They took that very seriously. They didn't just say, "Oh yeah, just tell us where the buttons are and we'll push them." They were like, "No, this has to be here because if there's an emergency, we got to do that." And so it was a very integrated process. I do personally think yes, we that there were 12 people who walked on the moon. So I've also as a scientist, when anytime someone points out something, oh, that you can tell it's fake because of this, I actually find that really interesting, because part of what makes me so excited to see stuff from that is that the things that Hollywood normally says would happen are usually actually wrong, and the things that you see there are what would actually happen science wise. And if you
Ah.
understand the physics and the details of what's going on, it makes a little bit more sense. I mean, I'll give you a classic example. I'm an amateur photographer. I love photography. um, a classic one is that the crosshairs don't show up on the bright backgrounds. I mean, that's a really
Mhm.
good one. It's like, well, yeah, because a crosshair would get, you know, I mean, if you actually photograph like thin crosshairs on bright backgrounds, you can see that stuff like that, you know. So, um,
So
and then
we've debunked a conspiracy on the show, so thank you for
I
that.
love conspiracies. I am not anti-conspiracy. I love the idea of it. I mean, in fact, uh, that's one of the things I like about the moon landing conspiracy actually the most, is that I find it really flattering. I don't get upset about it. I
Uh-huh.
think that it's the coolest thing ever, because to me, the fact that we as a country and my grandfather and just anybody who worked on it, that we did something that was so insanely hard that people don't believe you did it. I can't imagine a cooler record to hold for 50 years. I mean, I wish hope I can do something like that someday. I don't think I'll ever come close, but that to me that's the coolest thing. Where I mean, imagine someone like just take it as like the Olympics. Imagine someone ran like a 10-meter dash in like 4 seconds. And then
Mhm.
just for 70 years, everyone's like, that video is fake. That audience was in on it. There was no 1946 Olympics, or whatever the year was, 48, I guess.
If you look in the
Yeah.
crosshairs, there's actually a fake like a time.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine having that record. It's just like, you didn't do it in 4 seconds.
Uh,
No way.
it's the ultimate flattery. Yeah, if someone
Yeah, and it's just everyone's
made
like,
it,
dude, Usain Bolt did it in 9 seconds, 9.8, and why can't it? You know, if it was so easy, why aren't we all doing it in 4 seconds?
I'm like, I loaded the dishwasher in under 5 minutes and 48 seconds. I was like, yeah, that's fine. No one's going to question that feat. But if you do something
Yeah,
like remarkable, you get held up to scrutiny. So, you
but
know,
I believe in conspiracy theories. I mean, I think it's conspiracy theory that we didn't keep doing it. You know,
right. I
I
mean,
do. So
I guess when you look at what,
it begs the question. That's what's driving the uncertainty, is why aren't we doing it? And that's a good question. I don't have a good answer for that.
why has it been decades? I mean, you're obviously a curious person, and I think those are the type of people that do well in science, or at least we should encourage those type of folks to, those who are going to question things, not just those who are going to like do what they're told always.
Yeah,
But in
yeah.
school, that's
That's
not
what
great.
science is all about, is like trying to prove the experts wrong. People who say that science is about following the experts completely do not understand what science is. Science is the exact opposite. It is
But
doubting the
what
experts.
about
That's
when
why it
you're
was
the expert?
invented. What?
That's what science. What about when you're the expert though? Because like you've kind
Well, it can be annoying, but that just means you might be an expert but a bad teacher.
of
I mean, it's that simple. And science is about people reproducing results, not you finding the results and then hiding away in your lab. I mean, actually, there was a news story today, just today, that I am blanking on the school now, which is embarrassing, but professor was just fired, and it's very hard to fire professors, but he was fired because he was telling people that he got warm temperature superconductors to work. And I knew it was bullshit at the time because I know a lot about superconductors, and it just it didn't pass the smell test. I didn't know anything about why he was doing that, but I didn't go around saying this is clearly false because this could never happen. That was my instinct. So I happened to be on the right side of that, and that my instinct was like, no, I'll believe it when more people do it. But no, more people couldn't do it, and it turns out he was faking results and he was collecting lots of money and stuff like that. So, but I mean, that's the reality. Is like experts can be flawed just as easily as non-experts because they are still driven by human motivation, human fallacy, and those things. The entire point of the scientific method is to find out truth despite those flaws, not that those flaws all magically go away because you put a lab coat on or something. That doesn't happen.
No, but if you have more than 250,000 Twitter followers, your word is the truth. But that's for a different discussion. So I'm curious. You, as a youngin, you liked physics, but then you obviously had a lot of schooling. What is your takeaway on how science is taught? I mean, obviously you're kind of an exception, but I think some people think it's too emphasized. Most people think it's probably not enough. Like, what do you think is the good and bad of, we'll call it California's scientific education?
I went to a pretty good school in California. I went to Claremont High School. The Claremont school system is pretty darn good compared to California is not very good. Yeah, I would say it could be better. But this is probably the thing that a lot of people don't want to hear. But myself and most scientists I've met, especially ones that came from like a suppressed background or something like that, where they weren't born into a rich family or something, they couldn't go to a private school or whatever it is you needed to do. I went to a public school, which is fine. I think the thing that most people won't want to hear though is that most of them self-taught. I mean, like it's the motivation comes first, and then there's plenty of resources to find that. And a thing that I really like seeing in my kids is their ability to find out things now. I wish I had that as a kid, because I had to go to books and I had to go to the library and I had to go. I would watch really weird shows on PBS that most people don't even know about. Like there was this weird chemistry class. I learned a whole bunch of chemistry just by watching these weird chemistry videos that were played like at some random time in on PBS or something. This is definitely not Sesame Street or anything. I don't know what this show. I don't even know the name of what this was, but that nowadays with YouTube and stuff, it like my son, one of my sons, well, all of my kids learn so much from YouTube and things, but one of my sons just he just randomly started talking to me about differential topology, differential geometry and topology, and I was like, what how did you hear about that? I didn't hear about that till I was a grad student at Caltech. Like, where did you hear that? He's like, oh, there's a YouTuber who talks about it. I'm just like, what? So
yeah,
but the motivation comes first. The thing I think that we're going down a really strange path that I'm not super thrilled about, which is they're trying to dilute science in order to make it more appealing to students, and I don't think that's the right approach. But I'm not a.
What do you mean by that? I think it's important, but
I mean, I think motivating people to be excited about it, but I think trying to like teach non-science in science as a way to get people who don't like science to be interested in science, that might work on getting more people interested in science, but I don't think it actually helps the students who are already interested in it.
So what is an example of like a non-science being taught as science?
Well, I mean, I'll give you a cartooning example of like younger kids. I mean, it's fine for younger kids, but it's like where you make, today's project is we're going to make paper mache Martian rock or something. I don't know, something like that. That's I'm not trying to say that like it being fun and entertaining is okay. I just don't like it when it comes at the cost of it. Anyway, I don't want to shit talk the school system.
No, fair enough. I was hoping you would, but I can't get you to do that. Oh, fair enough. No. Well, I remember, gosh, in the 90s, and probably before that, like nuclear energy was a hot topic. In terms of like this is what's going to help sustain the planet. It's safer for the environment. Obviously, there's Chernobyl, and there's a cool HBO show that came far after that. But from a scientist perspective, it seemed like it was like a flash in the pan, and now it's radioactive. I mean, pun intended. It's like what I guess from a social point of view, what happened, and then I want to get into your background on nuclear energy, but kind of what happened from an outsider's perspective, in your opinion.
Yeah, so I started a nuclear company, so I've been studying the evolution of the politics and the economics around nuclear quite a lot in the last few decades, and so it's really interesting because a lot of times the things that people think caused it to sort of be suppressed are not really the things that actually suppressed it. So a really common talking point is fear of nuclear. That it played a role, but it wasn't the only cause. So Chernobyl definitely played a role in scaring people away from nuclear, but we didn't stop doing nuclear because of Chernobyl. In fact, actually, ironically, the people who are the most anti-nuclear, they're usually the ones saying that's why we stopped doing nuclear. There were actually really good political and technological reasons why the US, for example, slowed down the rate at which they build new nuclear. And what's kind of funny is the main reason is we got too good at it in the 50s and 60s. I know that sounds weird.
Yeah, what does that mean?
Well, we built too many nuclear power plants in the 50s and 60s, and we learned to build them at a really large scale because we were trying to power an entire city at once with one. And there's a lot of good economic reasons why you want to do that, but it doesn't mean you can't do it at other sizes. Nuclear can actually be the size of a briefcase, or it can be the size of a planet or a star. You can make a sun be a nuclear reactor if you want. That's one of the cool things about nuclear. It is extremely scale invariant. It can even be a supernova, like it goes all the way down to a thing that can fit in your hand to, all the way. And that's just because the energy is so dense, you can release it in all sorts of interesting ways. But in the case of the US, we wanted to make plants that made the most economic sense for a city. And so we put, if you were to make a map of the United States and say, right now, let's say you were saying, I want to build a new nuclear plant, and you come to a map and you start picking sites out. And you're like, okay, I want it to be near a city. I want it to be grid tied so it can connect to electricity. I don't want to be like downtown city, but I want it to be sort of away from it. And I want the land to be kind of cheap, and then you make a little map of this. And what you'd find, if you put little pins in that map, what you'd find is that the biggest problem you run into is that they all already have nuclear power plants on them, all of them. Like all of them. There's very few open spots. And so things like moratoriums on nuclear and things like that are not the main thing that slowed it down. In 2000, Steve Koonin, or in the 2008, when Steve Koonin was working for Obama, he was at the same, he's a colleague from the same lab at Caltech that I was at, the Kellogg Radiation Lab. He came up with this idea to make reactors smaller and modular. And this was a really important economic shift, because if you want to fill in the remaining spots all across the world, you can't just build a big one near a city. You have to be able to build smaller ones all over the place in different places, remote places. And if you do that, you can build them more like the way cars and things are built, like in an assembly line or, in a factory, and then you just ship the reactor to that location and you fuel it up. This doesn't mean you're shipping nuclear material around. You're just shipping the reactor, the empty reactor. And then, and this, like, the old way of building nuclear reactors is they were built completely on site, and that makes them take a lot longer, and that makes them more expensive. And so this idea of like, we're going to make them cheaper by building them bigger is not really the best way to look at it. So the way we're approaching now, so it took a long time for people to start laying the groundwork for this new nuclear revolution, but we're seeing it right now. There's a lot of startups building small modular reactors. And the reason that it's going to work is because they're going, I don't know which company is going to win. I have my personal favorites. I'm not going to say which ones they are in here, but, I have my favorites and ones I have my doubts about. But the fact is there's a lot of them, and a lot of them are going to succeed, and they're going to succeed in different ways. And they're going to make these smaller reactors, and they're going to be able to meet the demands of a particular area much more easily.
Well, like socially, how will they be accepted? I mean, there's still a stigma, in my opinion, to many about nuclear energy. I mean, it's going to take buy-in. Like I guess what do you see as the catalyst for that buy-in?
Yeah, there is, but there's also a lot of people who are very pro-nuclear. So you're in California, right?
Yeah, I'm in Orange County.
Yeah, so a lot of
California.
One of the biggest problems I have getting fundraising for my company is that most of the people I talk to are Bay Area investors, and I can tell you, a lot of times what you brought up is a thing that's extremely common to hear from investors. Like, well, I'm very pro-nuclear, but most people aren't. And what they mean is the man on the street, or well, I guess you wouldn't say man on the street in San Francisco. The person who identifies as a man on the street would, if you were to ask them, they would say, yeah, I'm very anti-nuclear, probably. But that's because the Bay Area is is the most anti-nuclear city in the entire country, possibly in the top 10 of the world, right? So that's an extremely biased bubble effect. If you go to Nebraska, it's the opposite. People are like, why aren't there more nuclear plants here? It's like, it's very different, so it's, and so that's fine, because we're, not everything has to be about powering California. So
what? Sorry, I've never heard such.
So I mean, but that main issue is the main reason why I started my company. I have a trick to get around that big problem. Not anti-nuclear bias, but just the bias that where you build a plant adds a lot to the cost and complexity of developing nuclear. And I started my company mostly to address that particular issue.
Well, my nipples are hard. I feel teased. Can you share with us more about your company?
Yeah. So, well, the overwhelming majority of nuclear companies are trying to make electricity. We are trying to make fuel instead. We're trying to use nuclear energy to make hydrocarbon fuel replacements of fossil fuels. In particular, our favorite is jet fuel.
Why is that?
The reason jet fuel is our favorite is because airlines have promised their customers that they're going to go carbon neutral. And as a physicist, I know there is no practical way they're going to make jet planes carbon neutral in, I would say, my lifetime, if ever.
Mm-hmm.
And I like jet planes. And on top of that, that demand is, by all accounts, their accounts, everyone else's accounts, is going to grow and grow and grow. In fact, by 2070, the overwhelming majority of energy used by the human race will be to power jet planes. And that will be mostly, that will be our biggest source of carbon emissions. And there's really no way to get around that physics-wise. I mean, the fact is, if you want 100 people or 400 people to go really fast, to go the speed of sound, or actually there's startups trying to bring back what the Concorde was trying to do. In all probability, by 2070, most of us will be going supersonic regularly. And guess what? It takes energy to go supersonic. It just does. And so I started the company to do that. And the reason this ties into that problem about, you might say, well, what does jet fuel have to do with people wanting it near them or something?
Yeah, what does jet fuel have to do with people wanting it near them?
Yes, yeah. So the reason is because right now the biggest reason why the plant has to be near the city is because grids don't transfer energy. They don't transfer electricity very efficiently. So it physically has to be near a big city. So if you want to power 1 million people living in a city, you have to have the nuclear power plant within a few, 10 miles of the 1 million people who want that electricity. What we're trying to do is decouple the place where the energy is used from where the energy is produced. And so you can actually go to a place where people want it. Farmland is a good example. Most farmers are very pro-nuclear. They're very unserved by nuclear because farms do not have a lot of demand for electricity. So a lot of times I've met tons of farmers who tell me, like, I don't understand why they're not building plants here. And it's because we love it here. But there is a good reason, because there aren't a lot of people. So why would they build a plant there? But we're trying to decouple that. We're trying to say, no, we can put plants here, and here, and then the energy can be bought and sold, other places.
When did you start this company, Kevin?
Started 4 years ago.
Okay, so this was
at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah, was there any? So you were just kind of bored.
No, I wasn't bored. No, actually, it was worse. I was employed and I quit my job, which I probably shouldn't have. But
so you were the first person to actually quit his job during the pandemic when you could have gotten paid doing nothing.
Yep.
See, not all scientists.
I don't think my job would have paid me to sit at home doing nothing, unfortunately. But maybe I wouldn't have quit if that was it.
I thought you were in academics, but maybe the wrong division.
No, I was a chief scientist for another energy company.
Okay, so you actually had to do work. That's tough.
Yeah.
So what are some of the, I guess, what have you been most pleasantly surprised about in terms of the reaction to your business?
The two things I'm most surprised about is how positive the reaction is, even from, all kinds of investors. I started a company in the 90s and I got told, that's dumb. You don't know what you're talking about, all the time. That does not happen now. People love it. What I'm also surprised about is why it's still so hard to have someone just hand me a check for $2.5 million.
There's nothing harder than getting someone to part with $1, I've learned.
Yeah.
Unless you're a stripper, but in terms of like business, it's pretty challenging.
Yeah. So, I say as a joke that I'm surprised that I haven't gotten it, but actually, I have tons of founder friends. I have lots of people I know who've, I have investor friends. I have people who've done startups before. I'm not at all surprised because it takes talking to the right person at the right time, and there's a lot of timing involved and things like that. So I knew that when I started the company. I wasn't expecting it to get funded right away. I started the company also banking on the political shift occurring in this decade, because I had a lot of indicators that I knew about, that I knew that the public perception of it would shift dramatically, and it's doing that like crazy. That part's going great. It's going better than I thought it was going to go, honestly.
If that's like kind of an ancillary benefit, that's huge, Kevin. Hearing you say that is very like heartening. But I guess on a dollars and cents level, sounds like you're looking to raise money. What is that money for? Like, what is the use of funds, as they say?
Yeah, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to begin part of the NRC process to get approval to do the most risky part of what we're trying to do. And I say risky very loosely. So I'm going to clarify because I don't want to scare anyone. It is not risky in terms of causing an accident or that kind of risky. It's risky in just that it's the thing we're trying to get our piece so that other people don't have the ability to do what we do. So that's the only part that makes it risky, is that it's a thing that no one's done before, but it's not a thing that's risky technologically or scientifically. And definitely it's not risky related to safety. It's a bureaucratic hurdle that we have to get over. You see this with SpaceX and the FAA. There are hurdles that Elon is like the richest man in the world. He's friends with the president-elect. He owns all the land in Bolsa Chica, and he still has to do a study on whether turtles are going to be upset by the loud noise. So I mean, like there are things like that in everything, and in nuclear. And so basically, that's one of the parts that we want to, with the initial funds, we want to launch that process first, and then there's some other like sort of secret stuff that we want to do too. But
okay. But this is like a private sector business, correct? Or is it going to be? Okay.
Well, it'll be government funded, but that's okay. That's through the SBIR program and the Advanced Act. There's actually, I mean, that's the other thing that's gone really well. I knew that there would be better government support for nuclear. It's like better than I could imagine, and because the Inflation Reduction Act, the Advanced Act, it has amazing bipartisan support at the federal level. Like it is not a partisan issue. And even in this last election, and I built that into the company. I did not want the company to go out of business because one party won or the other party didn't.
That's smart.
I mean, that would have been a nightmare. So, and it's true. It's like no matter who won the election, we would have been okay. So
the end goal, would be to replace a fueling station, or I guess what like. So if your tests work out well, you get funded. What will be different as a result of your company?
Well, what will be different is that hopefully within the next 10 years, if we launch at the scale that we want to, you'll be flying out of LAX one day, and there will be a good chance that without you even noticing, and nothing about the flight changing, nothing about the airplane changing, you'll be flying on a nuclear powered flight. I mean, the nuclear material doesn't make it into the plane, just to clarify. No radioactive stuff or anything. The fuel is functionally identical to the fuel that they normally load with, but you can sit there realizing that the energy that came for that flight didn't come from dinosaurs 400 million years ago, if you believe in that sort of thing. It didn't come from dinosaurs or under the ground. It came from nuclear energy from the atmosphere in the last year before that flight. You'd be flying in a carbon neutral flight.
So what do you mean by from moisture or like particle?
No. So the way we want to do it is to use farm waste. That's one of the reasons why building your farms is actually a good thing, because we actually want to help farmers where we buy their farm waste. Sometimes they just leave it on the field. It's already bought and sold by farmers at a really huge scale, so it's not new to farmers. But farm byproducts like corn stover, silage, and roughage, that kind of thing, we convert that into hydrocarbon fuel. So that's a very low energy state of carbon. It's one of the lowest energy states there are. And we convert it to one of the highest energy states there is, like jet fuel as an example. Jet fuel and diesel are very high energy states of the carbon atom. That's where the carbon atom contains the most energy. And it's similar. The way we do this is not too dissimilar from how geology did it. It's kind of doing the same thing. Geology does it by, because the biggest thing is life doesn't really give up all the oxygen. That's how photosynthesis works. I'm getting into technical details here, but photosynthesis basically combines water and CO2 to form sugars. And the reason it can do that with photosynthesis is that it never really parts with some of the oxygen molecules. They sort of hang on. They're sort of like a third wheel, or like a like a friend who crashes on your couch kind of thing.
That's like me with the national headliner. I'm always
exactly. Yeah, like,
you can't get me.
I can ride in the trunk, man. It's cool. It's cool.
Yeah.
In the trunk. Yeah, I just want to tour with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just follow Bert Kreischer's tour bus. Just
I have pictures from Red Rock. Bert, where's your boy Matt?
Yeah.
I'll take my shirt off too.
Yeah. So when nature does it, so geology takes plant material. I know people say it's dinosaurs, it's almost always plants. Plants from a very long time ago, greater than 4,000 years, allegedly, is put under geological places, and it's compressed and it's heated. And that compression and heating makes it so that the energy state of that carbon atom is still in equilibrium when it squeezes the oxygen out into the rocks around it. And so it converts a carbohydrate into a hydrocarbon in that process. And it's very slow, and it takes a long time, and it's underground.
Well, that's what I figured.
The same
I'm
thing.
glad you explained it.
We're trying to do the same thing, and this is actually chemistry-wise and science-wise, this is a very well understood process. We're not the inventors of this process. The process is generally called pyrolysis. That's the family of this, but we do it in like a few seconds. Just instead of using heat and pressure from the Earth, we get the heat and pressure from the nuclear reactor.
Wow. So is your goal, Kevin, to stay a part of this as it commercializes, or do you want to then like get it to a certain point and hand it over to Elon, or like what would like your personal goal from this?
My personal goal is to stay on top of it the entire way. If there's some reason where I were really approached by people I trusted a lot saying like, Kevin, you're just not that good at managing a team this big or something like that. If that happened, I would find somebody who would be able to do it. But I got to tell you, being a comedian is part of what makes me so confident that I would be very happy being in charge, be good at motivating large numbers of people, because I've you've done this too. We've done this. If you make a room full of 400 people violently shake their bodies uncontrollably, it's a very big powerful feeling, and that's a big part of motivating people, is like just telling them the right words in the right order to get them to understand what you're trying to do. So
generally comedians are good communicators. Now I don't think they're all good business people, but then again, most aren't you either. So
Elon might be a better businessman than me. I don't know.
I don't know.
I'll tell you what, if I got to host SNL, I would have crushed, and he was kind of so.
Shots fired. Shots fired.
Yeah. I think he'd agree with me, man. I think he'd be like,
oh yeah, he probably would. Well, this is super cool, and I want to have you back maybe as the process develops a little bit. But I have a quick question. My son Reed geeks out over all things science, and he was watching a YouTube video, maybe similar channels as your kids, about I think it was called white stars.
White dwarfs?
Yeah, white dwarfs. Can you explain to me, because I thought he did a good job. I still didn't really understand it, but it's probably above my head. What's a white dwarf? And
interesting. Okay.
Pay attention to Kevin, not me, not your dad.
Yeah. Okay. So white dwarfs are a little bit like a fossil fuel in a weird way. This is the first time I've heard myself say that out loud, but it's kind of true. So when a star runs out of fuel, it explodes in the last sort of gasp. They do it in different ways depending on how big they are. But when a star runs out of fuel, a star our size, the size of the sun, when it runs out of fuel, it will not be heavy enough to turn into a neutron star. It won't be heavy enough to turn into a black hole. It just doesn't have enough mass. And what will happen is in fact, it doesn't even have enough mass to burn the fuel in the way that makes up most of us. We came from a star that was larger, allegedly. That we were made of carbon and oxygen and nitrogen. That all comes from a larger star than our sun can even do. That's because that goes into like a thing called the CNO cycle. But this detail. But the sun, a star that's our sun size, when it runs out of fuel, it'll basically just collapse and not really do anything. And what will happen is it'll collapse, but there's nothing pushing back on it really anymore, except for something called degeneracy pressure, which is just a fancy way of saying no two things can occupy the same spot at the same time, which is a law from quantum mechanics. I know it's a colloquial law, but it's also a quantum mechanical law about one half of the type of particles in the universe. They can't occupy the same spot at the same time. And so because of that, they can't just collapse to a point. They can't turn into a black hole. They reach a boundary where they're not heavy enough to squeeze them past that pressure, but they're not light enough to do anything else. So anyway, when that happens, though, the time it takes for energy, the remaining heat, the heat that was left over from this collapse and from the remnants of the last nuclear fuel burning, that energy takes a really, really long time to escape the star. And so it just sits there glowing, very much like an ember. And the rate at which it glows is very small compared to how much energy it has stored in it. And so it just sits there glowing and glowing and glowing for a really, really long time, like trillions of years. And then it will slowly get dimmer, and it will turn into a red dwarf. That's what it's called when it turns into it gets dimmer. And then eventually it will turn into a brown dwarf and then a black dwarf. And there are no black dwarfs, brown dwarfs, because the universe isn't old enough for those. They're just theoretical. But
something to look forward to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that was definitely the best explanation of a white dwarf star that we've ever had on this podcast. So my hat's off to you, Kevin.
Okay, no problem. I'm not an astrophysicist, though, so I'm sure there's some astrophysicists who are like, "Oh my God, that sucked." Yeah, you didn't die.
Well, my son's going to question some of what you said, but I'll put you guys in touch to hash it out.
I encourage you to do the thing that I started off this podcast by telling, which is don't just trust what some expert says. Go find out for yourself. You can certainly read about red dwarfs, and maybe he won't even like their explanation. And you can do the calculation on it. Calculate the degeneracy pressure. Learn about that. That's the best way to find out if people are telling the truth or not.
Dr. Kevin is saying, do your own research. Be skeptical, question, pursue on your own. Well, we definitely need to have you back, but we're kind of wrapping up this episode. And I like to ask guests, same question when we conclude. Kevin, what are you most optimistic about?
Oh, so much. I mentioned what my dad taught me when I was a kid, but I forgot to mention what my mom taught me. She was a techno-optimist. She was like really into the sort of Star Trek vision of the world and that kind of thing, that everything was going to be great. I really think that's what I'm most optimistic about, is that we are really entering a new, extremely exciting phase of humanity. I really do. I wasn't sure we were going to make it, but now I have a lot more confidence that we're going to make it. I think we're going to be on all kinds of planets very soon, very, very soon. We're going to have technology that I can barely understand at the moment. And I think we're going to face a lot of adversity. We're going to still have war. We're going to still have problems with new technology like AI and stuff, but I'm really convinced that humanity is positioned now to address those as best we can at the time, and that we'll come out successful in the end.
Well, that makes me happy. And where can people out there learn more about you and what you're up to?
You can follow me on Instagram or Twitter, X, KP Hickerson. Hell, you can even contact, if you have a business opportunity, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. And if you want to go full rogue, follow me on OnlyFans. all right, I'm not on OnlyFans.
Oh damn! I was gonna subscribe to you.
Yeah.
Well, Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt. It's great being on here.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Matt Balaker podcast. To learn more, please check out mattbalaker.com and encourage your friends to like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate it.